Hello everyone. Hello and welcome to episode 116 of BIM After Dark Live. Today we're going to be talking about Revit to Twinmotion for exterior real-time renderings and scenes. We're going to be continuing on talking about the Northwing project, so I'll do a little update on where that is, and then show you some tips and tricks on getting your Revit models into Twinmotion and creating scenes quickly, and some tips and tricks on making them look realistic. Lower the intro music there. For those of you just joining us for the first time, this is a weekly live stream where I talk about Revit, BIM, architectural, engineering, and construction technologies, anything adjacent. Sometimes we have guests on, sometimes it's just me. What I'm doing right now is a series called the Northwing. Definitely check out last week's episode. I'll link it below. And yeah, it's where I'm designing and building a primary suite addition to my house. And so whenever there's something to say, I'm going to hop on live and give you guys an update on the project. This is a live stream, so I want to remind you, if you're here Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern time, feel free to chat, ask questions in the chat, heckle, do whatever you need to. I'll be keeping an eye on it. If you're here in the future, thank you for joining, and make sure you subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. So cheers, thanks for that. And yeah, let's jump right into the content. I'm going to turn off the music for you guys. So if you did not see last week's episode, I did an overview of the Northwing project, which is a primary suite to my house, and I will be designing and building it. So I'm going to be sharing the whole process from design sketches to renderings to construction documents to permitting process to even the general contracting stuff, from scheduling to estimating to budgeting to ordering to bidding, you name it. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if it's all going to be live or if I'm going to edit some videos and have them published. But right now, as the flow of this project goes, I'm just going to keep sharing what we've got here. So last week, where we left off was essentially a couple of different schemes. I walked through the 3 or 4 different schemes that we had for the exterior, and then the and overall design schemes, and then a couple of different layouts for the actual bedroom, bathroom, closet, all that good stuff. And so this is kind of where we are today. So a couple things that happened since last week. One was there was a lot of discussion between my client and I, which is of course my wife, about having the primary suite on the lower level where all of the children would be on the upper level. And after lots of discussion, we weren't big fans of that. And so basically the latest layout, you're going to see the primary bedroom is actually laid out on the main level. And so if I go here, I'll zoom in a little bit, and this is kind of where the layout's at right now. You can see we have a little bit of a notched in entrance here. So it kind of feels a little more private, maybe even do like a barn door in front of it. So when we're having guests over or something, we can slide that shut. You won't even notice there's a door back there. And then a little bit more modest than the one I had downstairs as far as the size of the closets and so on and so forth, but still a pretty neat space that we'll look at in 3D. And so basically what that means for the project, hey Stan, what's going on? What that means for the project downstairs is we have this giant space to work with. What we're thinking now is this is kind of an existing family room right now as we use it. And this is my office. I'm actually sitting right here in this chair right now as we speak. But it's always been a little awkward because my office is kind of like a mud room to go outside, which this house really needed a connection to the backyard because we were using the garage to get out. And so what we're thinking about doing now is maybe doing a double office. My wife and I have an office with some extra storage space under the new addition, and then converting this to be more of a secondary family room or playroom for the kids, as well as just that exit out there. So this office that we're in now may transfer. So otherwise, everything else kind of looks the same. I did do some sketching and some refining of the exterior. So the two things that I wanted to get done were to figure out some layout, get closer and closer to the floor plan with my wife, and then also to produce some renderings. And really, actually, I presented the live scheme here, not the actual rendering. I presented the live Twinmotion scheme of the exterior and get her initial thoughts, again, as the client, on the exterior and some feedback and so on and so forth. And so just quickly, this is what the scene looks like complete. Okay, so I'll zoom around a little bit so you guys can see. Okay, so you can start to get a sense of what it is. I'm trying not to go too fast. And so pretty much just presented like this with all the properties gone, because personally I like presenting this way. And Twinmotion has come a long way in the sense that it looks incredibly nice in real time, and the shading and lighting is super impressive, including the reflectivity. So that's the final scene. So today what we're going to do is we're going to jump into how I did that. So we're going to kind of take it back, start with a different file, load in, talk about how setting up these things in Revit, how to get into it. And the cool thing about that is I actually logged my time while I was doing this, and I created created that scene that you saw there in less than an hour. The one caveat is I had the context forest done already, but it's probably would have taken an extra 5 to 10 minutes to redo the context forest, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we go through. Pretty cool, right? So let's go back to the scene real quick, just so I can show you. Some of the things before we do jump into it, some of the feedback. So I did have the presentation with my wife, and she loved the concept, loved the scheme and everything. Really, the only feedback she gave was she wasn't a huge fan of the columns or the brackets, or just something about them. Maybe there was too many, too busy. I'm not really sure. And so I got to do a couple of design options to get a sense of what she was feeling when she said that. And so obviously you can see the columns here. I screwed those up in Revit. I got to re-import that. But that was pretty much the biggest comment there. So I'm going to do some studies on the actual columns themselves and sort of get a sense of maybe what it is that she was feeling there. Okay, so that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to jump in. We'll jump into Revit. I'll talk about how I use Revit with Twinmotion. This is Twinmotion for Revit that I'm using. So this is the free version for Revit users. And then I'm also using Revit 2025. So there is a direct link connection, but we'll talk about that process a little bit. So before I jump into the actual content, I did want to remind everybody, if you're here tonight and you're interested in this content and this series especially, then you owe it to yourself to check out an in-person conference that I'm hosting in September called Niche BIM. Okay, so here in Hartford, Connecticut, it's a one-day, all day long, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Conference where it's designed specifically for small firm, sole practitioner architects doing small-scale residential projects using BIM, essentially. And so we got some incredible speakers, as you can see here. We got Brenton Weiberg, Dan Stein, Nicholas Catelier from BIM Pure, Alex Gore, and then myself. And some incredible classes, so check out the actual classes. An awesome venue. I'm super excited about it. And of course, we also are offering 5 AIA CEUs as well. So not only do you get to meet a whole bunch of like-minded architects using BIM like yourselves in the residential small-scale industry, see 5 incredible sessions with awesome speakers, as well as hang out with them all day long, and then network and hang out during our happy hour with some live music and so on and so forth. So if you're interested, please head on over to nichebim.com. That is NICHEBIM.com and register today. It's on September 9th here in Hartford, and we only have about 2 weeks left or so to register before we close registration, so I can get final counts and take care of all the logistics and so on and so forth. So if you love this content, if you love this specific type of content, or my modern barn series, or my modern kitchen series, the small residential stuff, then this is definitely a conference for you. So hopefully I'll see you there. Yeah, again, that's nichebim.com, NICHEBIM.com, and I'll put a link below in the description as well. Okay, so now let us talk about Twinmotion. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open the original file. Hopefully it doesn't freak out on me. Using, there we go. Using programs like Twinmotion, Enscape while live streaming is always terrifying. So let's hope this works out for you guys. Ruburn Productions from Australia, what's up? Tampa, Florida. Absolute Des says the music makes her want to, or him want to drink whiskey. Very nice. I'm happy happy for that. Okay, so this was kind of the original starting scene of the scheme that I had there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with this scheme, and we're going to actually flip out the house, just so I can show you how easy it is to even flip through a different scheme. The one thing that, let me just clean up. I'll get rid of the bedroom context so it's not all there. And then I'll get rid of the close vegetation so it's not all there. Okay. So now we have this guy here. All right. And we'll turn on Lumen. Now we'll turn that on later. I'll talk about that stuff later. Let's go back to stand. Okay. So first things first, what I would highly suggest is if you guys, if you have a material, so if you have something like this set up where I have the scene already done from a previous version or a previous design, or maybe you have a different project and you want to use some of these materials and you really like the materials that you've set here, I highly suggest that you add them to your user library. Okay, so if I scroll down here, what you'll see is I've got most of these materials added to the user library. And how you do that is very simple. So if I press T on my keyboard, it pulls up this little eyedropper, and I can click a material. And then over here on the right, you'll see there's the material. Let me move my face for a second. Okay, so over here on the right is the material. And then you hit these little ellipses over here, and you say add to user library. So what you can do is you can take all these materials. I can take this wood. I can take the wood down here. I can take this cedar. I can take the horizontal siding, like all these different pieces. The stone that I have here, the grass that I have here. I highly suggest that you do that because as you have this pretty much infinite amount of materials to choose from. And so if you have some stuff that you spent some time tweaking and going and modifying the color and the metallic and all those other things, I highly suggest you add it to the user library. And then this way, if you do refresh it and it loses materials or you do a new project, you can easily drag those materials into there. So Absolute Des just asked, any idea how to use Revit in Twinmotion when the project is located in ECC? Well, if you have the ability to open the project, then you have the ability to pump it into Twinmotion. What I was going to say first is that jumping onto the Revit side, let me jump back to Revit. There's a couple tips that I'll give you as far as the Revit side is concerned. First, I still am not using, let me go to complete here. I still am not using the direct link. So the way I use Twinmotion and the way sort of the flexibility I want with it, I'd much rather have file export from Revit. I can override the thing, doesn't matter, override the Datasmith file, import to Twinmotion, and then this way, if I do an update, it's just export, override, refresh, export, override, refresh. Honestly, it's not that different than direct link anyways. You're refreshing now. The difference is I have the ability to export different things separately, right? So when you do direct link, you're basically forced, if I jump over here, you're forced to bring in whatever's on in your view, right? If you use Datasmith, you can bring in things separately. So what I can do if I really want to is I can export just my existing house and then the new, or what I would highly suggest, which I didn't do on this project mainly because it's an old scene and I just haven't felt like going back. But I usually do it on most of our projects, is I will suggest this export the site separate from the building. So this way, when you're constantly updating the building, your site is staying the same. Because what you're going to see here is that when I do refresh the site, I may lose some of my scattered vegetation like grass and so on and so forth. So, and you cannot do that if you do direct link. You have to do whatever's in your view. So for the sake of today, I'm exporting landscape with the house. But if you were using, if you were separating them, you would simply just have a view that only shows your topo solid, and then you have a view that only shows your building, and then you export those as separate Datasmith files, and you import those into Twinmotion. Okay, so what I did here is simply go to Twinmotion, export to Datasmith file right here, export to Datasmith file. and then I just override this file. So if I want to make a separate one, I can. I've been overriding this and archiving it if I need to, but then this way I can just refresh it and it's easier. But either way, you're basically just exporting this file as a Datasmith file. And then in Twinmotion, all that I have to do is go to import and either bring in the new one if I want to bring in both, which I can, or refresh it. What I'll do right now is I'll actually bring in both so I can show you the benefit of Datasmith over Direct Link, right? So if I go here and I click import, and then I do the Northwing one, and then I'm gonna leave all this. Yeah, that's fine. I'll keep it. So when you're importing too, there's another interesting thing. So you have an option to either keep hierarchy, collapse by material, or collapse all. For a long time, I was using collapse by material because what it does is it takes your Revit material and it combines the geometry so that you can, that's the selectability of it. So if you have something that's siding, it comes in as one object called siding, and then that's how you select it. I've actually been kind of moving towards keeping the hierarchy. Even though it makes the container really long when you open it, it adds a ton of flexibility, because what that means is it actually is maintaining your Revit category system and the elements individually. So if you actually wanted to take one column and actually physically move it in Twinmotion, you can. Not all the columns that are the same material. So the only downfall is that you just have this gigantic container when you expand it, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But I would suggest that if you have lights, you want to process all, which is meshes and lights. And one suggestion I also have here is set all values to TM default. I believe Twinmotion can bring in IES files. I believe it does try to translate them. Anytime I've ever maintained that, they come in way too bright. And so I set the values to TM default, and honestly, I'm still always tweaking them afterwards because the lights are just always going to look different in one program to another, but it at least brings in a lighting source, which is what you want, right? So for this, I actually don't have any lights in this specific area of the project, but I'm gonna leave it for all anyways. And then we won't talk about substitution today because there's not really much to do with substitutions yet. I'm gonna click import. Makes sense, direct link to the network. Yeah, that's the other thing I should say about direct link is that it confuses the crap out of people. When you think about Enscape, it's sitting on top of your Revit project. So it's not like a standalone scene. It's your Revit scene being opened in a real-time rendering program, right? And then proxy objects, etc. The Twinmotion workflow to direct link, and whenever I talk to users, and a lot of questions I get is that exact thing. It's well, where is my Twinmotion file versus my Revit file, and my import file versus this file, and it's still a pretty clunky, confusing thing. I know they're doing a lot to try and improve it. I get it, fine. But right now, I'd rather have a Datasmith file. I know where it is. This is the one I'm importing. This is the one I'm exporting, and it's not that difficult to just go into Revit, make a change, export and overwrite the Datasmith file, go into Twinmotion, and click refresh. That's literally all it is. So first tip there is don't use direct link. Okay, so now I'm going to bring it in as a separate file, just so that you guys can see some of the benefits of what I'm talking about here. And so here you can see the difference between these two schemes, which is kind of cool. And so here's my import for the original scheme. Here's my import for the other scheme. What you'll notice is that it did not carry any of the materials over. And so if I did a refresh, if I did an overwrite and a refresh, because this is the same model and the same scene, it actually holds most of the materials. There's a couple that do some weird things, but for the most part, it held all of the materials that existed beforehand. For the sake of argument today, I'm not doing that, but you can kind of get a sense here. So this came in, but it's cool is that I can actually have both of these things live in here. So if I wanted to, right, in theory, I could have my existing house in here and only have the addition as a Datasmith file and the other addition as a Datasmith file, and be able to basically turn them on and off and be able to flip through them. So things like design options, schemes, whatever you're doing, you have so much more flexibility when it comes to using a Datasmith workflow versus a there's all the lights. Hello. Versus a direct link workflow. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to show you too is you'll notice here if I pull this down, I'm gonna have to put, what I'll do is I'll put my face on the other side. Whoop, there I go. Just because there's a lot of stuff on the right hand side here in Twinmotion. Okay, So what you'll notice here, if I expand this, is, let me hold the properties, is, yes, there is a gigantic amount of collapse hierarchy. There's a gigantic amount of stuff here. But, and yeah, it's a huge list, but it does give you a ton of flexibility in the sense that if I wanted to right now, notice I can select just this column, right? Which they actually, for some reason, they knew that this wanted to be grouped with this, maybe because it was hosted to it. But I have the ability to turn these things on and off, or even physically move them. Like I can physically move this column only in this space. Obviously, when you're doing that, you're detaching the reality from Revit, and so if you bring it back and refresh it, it's going to basically return. And so I don't do a ton of moving, but what I might do is, like, for example, as I mentioned before, maybe I want to just do a rendering where these two columns are off, or these things are, you know, these are off, these whatever they're called, these braces, you know. So I'm selecting the braces and I'm turning them off. Without actually modifying the model, I can quickly make tweaks to this quickly for the visualization and not have to go back. Right, and so that's kind of cool. It gives you that flexibility. If it was combined by material, then all of those wood beams would all be combined because they were using the same Revit material. Okay, so now it's as simple as applying my materials. And when you have a material library, it becomes pretty straightforward. A little tip for applying materials is this little box on the top. So this is, if I pull this down, this is cubic UVs versus from object UV. By default, it's from object UV. My new state of doing things is flipping it to cubic UV, because then you don't have to scale them. I'm sure everyone out there who's used Twinmotion for Revit so far has probably been wondering, why the hell do I have to scale every material I apply by like a 15x scale factor with Revit models? That is why. Because this is set to default by from object UV, and for whatever reason Revit UV mapping sucks, or the way it comes in sucks, I don't know, but you end up having to scale everything by like, you know, 20 every single time you pull them in. If you set it to by cubic, and actually what I'll do is I won't use one of my materials yet, I'll just use it out of the box one. So if I set this default to, let's go here, pull this back. Okay, so if I go to, let's just do something brick maybe. Okay, so if I take this brick material, right? So if I set this default to from object UV and I throw this brick on here, you'll notice the scale is tiny, right? And so what I've been doing forever until I figured this out was I go over here and I type 15 or 10 or whatever the hell it is to get it close, right? You'll notice if I undo this, if I set this to cubic UVs and I drag this on, and I drag to the wrong one, oops, there we go. You'll notice it's to scale, right? So just a little tip there, if you set it to cubic UVs for Revit imports, it should always be pretty much to scale when you throw it on there, which is awesome, right? The problem with a material library is some of them I did to cubic and some of them I did to surface UV, just because of where I saved them from, and so I'm still having to mess with the scales of these. So I probably should redo my material library and just use one or the other. But what I'll show you right here is very simple. If I go to from object and I take my, let's do wooden planks, so this is the vertical wood siding, and I throw this on here. Maybe that wasn't wood planks, yeah. So you'll notice this is very tiny, right? So that one I did do by cubic. And so unfortunately, because of my library, there we go. So now you can see that's the, I'll go to this side so you can see it. I'll tweak the lighting settings in a little bit. So that, unfortunately, that's kind of, I got myself on that one pretty bad, but it is what it is. So then we'll go around and we'll just drag in some of the materials here. There's a wood material. Oh, I got a, in your area, the state you live in, do you show tree diameters in the site plan? sorry. So there was a question about tree diameters and site plan, and yeah, I mean it depends. It depends. Depends on the trees, the location, the site plan, if it's important to have them on there or not. But no, there's no basic requirement for projects to show tree diameters unless they have a specific reason to show them, as far as I know. So, and you know, these stones, all these materials now, I can just grab from what I had here. So I have a stone. Which one is this? Oh, there's one. As you can see how big it is there. So that's because I had it set to cubic UVs. So I'm going to jump back to from object UVs, and that's supposed to be the wall. I got to change those materials in Revit. That's okay. We'll just leave it the same for now. But then we just go along and assign all the materials to this. I'm not going to go through and assign all the materials for you, but I will show you sort of some tips and tricks on where I've gotten these materials from. And so what you'll see here, you know, a lot of these are out of the box ones that are tweaked a little bit. Some of them are also Quixel Mega Scan materials. So this one here, if I zoom in really tight to it, you can see it's a pretty nice material. That one is a Quixel Mega Scan. It's a wood planks, and then I modified the color of it in Twinmotion. So if I type T and I click here, you can see I changed the tint of it to black, and I've also added a little bit of metallicness. I've noticed when you're using black materials in Twinmotion, especially, the metallic really helps you discern some of the stuff that's going on within it. And then there's also a wood siding one here, which I'll put on there. You can see the redwood siding. I've got some steel framing. I've also got some some metals here that you can see. It was a nice little metal material. So I'm going to jump into the other scene so that I can show you some of the light settings and when the materials are already done, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. So let me jump into the other scene. Plus, I don't like how this one's running. So while that opens, you know, step one is getting your Revit model ready using the Datasmith exporter. And actually, there's a couple things I'll show you in Revit too that are going to be helpful, and I'll explain with the site and landscaping. And then step two is once you import it into Twinmotion, applying the textures. I would actually argue, so I usually, I don't know if I set the ambiance before the texture or the texture before the ambiance, because sometimes it helps. But setting the ambiance for your live scene is super helpful in Twinmotion. And so if I jump in here, you can see this one, I have the ambiance, the lighting settings look much cleaner than the last one you're in. And that's because I spent some time setting the ambiance for what you see in the live scene. Because once you do that, it makes the rendering and everything else look so much easier. So that's what we're going to talk about right now, is I'll show you the ambiance settings. And so ambiance, for those of you that don't know, in Twinmotion, those are basically your light and shadow settings in the program. As you can see, I've spent some time refining these, and I think, personally, I think they look pretty damn good for the real-time scene. They obviously look better during the post, which you've seen some examples of, but they look pretty damn good for the real-time scene. And so what are the settings I have here? You'll notice the daylighting and stuff, none of this is set because I am using HDRI skies. And so here's my HDRI skies setting. I'm using noon cloudy 20. I usually use, I actually usually use for the HDRIs, if I go over here and I go to skies, I usually use morning and afternoon cloudy. I think it's 34. But because of the elevation of this and the trees around it and stuff, I needed something that was higher up. It was like too long of shadows. So that's why I'm using the noon cloudy. And I also thought it just really made a nice lighting for the scene. So what's the difference between HDRI and not? Well, if I turn off this, and if I turn this on, hopefully you can see the difference there. But essentially what it's doing is it's doing global illumination of the actual sky. So it's using the colors, the brightness, and all of that good stuff to actually enhance the scene. So you're almost always going to get a more realistic rendering when you're using an HDRI sky, because it's doing its ray tracing and all that good stuff using the colors and the lighting from the sky itself. So rotation depends on the view and what I'm doing. You know, a pro tip for renderings that I always give people is, even if you're never going to look behind it, you'll notice, see, I have these tree shadows on the bottom. Well, if I look behind it, this is all I've got. Okay. Of course, I'm going to have some views behind it now, but whatever. But you know, the camera, this is behind the camera, but I'm putting these trees because a scene like this, if it was just a field with no shadows in it, is way less dynamic and way less realistic, right? When you have shadows behind your camera, it ends up being super, super helpful in making things just look more realistic and, you know, add a little dynamicism to your rendering, I guess you could say. Technically, there are a couple trees right where I put them. It's just maybe not the exact ones, but super helpful when you're doing real-time rendering to do that. It also helps break up large planes of grass and stuff like that. So yeah, so intensity is around 5. Depending on the HDRI sky you use, you may need to do a little less or more. If I go to 1, you'll see what it does. It tends to darken things up a little bit, so you got to find out which sky, what works for you. So I had this. Oops, jump that back on. Okay, come on. There we go. So I was around 5.9 there, so I'll leave it at 5.9 there. Depth of field, yeah, I do have a depth of field in the renderings, not in the real-time view, Rick, which I'll show you in a minute. But none of this other stuff is being used because I'm using the HDRI skies. The only other thing I will tell you is that sun intensity is a thing, and so I noticed, especially when you're using Path Tracer, a lot of people run into this where sometimes when you flip the Path Tracer, sun intensity drops to 0, and you're trying to figure out why the hell I'm not seeing shadows, but everything else is rendering, and that's actually why. For some reason, I've noticed, even in the newest version, every once in a while that'll happen. So you want to make sure you have your sun intensity on, first of all. If I drop it to 0, you'll see what happens. All the shadows go away, right? If I go to 50, you'll see it's there. And so you can play with this, you know, depending on your scene. You can see if I go to 48,000, which is a crazy slider there. It's going nuts, but we're going to go to 50. And then the ambient light. One thing you'll notice too with Twinmotion is it tends to have some dark. It tends to have some dark corners and ambient lights, dark shadows, dark areas that you need to brighten up. So it's okay to go a little overboard on the ambient lighting and the shadow reduction because you do tend to have really dark corners in Twinmotion. It's just the nature of what it is. It's what, I mean, in my humble opinion, that's kind of how it's structured. And so ambient light you'll see is probably going to be higher. If I drop it down, you'll see kind of what I mean. You know, if you don't crank this up a little bit, you start losing stuff in the shadows. Hopefully you saw some of that change there. So anyway, so we got sun intensity at 50, ambient at 1. And we're going to jump over to camera. Camera, I almost always use auto exposure, mainly because, like I said, I'm typically presenting in live scenes these days, just like I'm doing for you today. And so with that, you want to keep on auto exposure because every time you're looking around, you're gonna have to adjust your exposure. And you can see my exposure is actually at 0.5, anywhere between 1 and 0.5. But you'll notice if I kept it at 1 because there's so much white in the scene, it actually is blowing out a little bit. So my suggestion would be auto exposure, but then decrease it or increase it to the best of your ability. Oh, auto save is on. Sorry about that. While that's saving, there was a question on there. Do I still use Enscape for early stages? Yes, I'm still using Enscape right now for this project. It's great for, especially like I've mentioned in many other videos, hopping right into the scene, usually in white mode, and just looking around to feel the perspective of a space. It's just no competition to that with the smoothness of being able to just, okay, now I modeled the space. I've seen it in orthographic view. I've seen it in a sectional view. Now I just want to hop in real quick and get a feel for the scale at a human scale. Enscape, white mode, jump in, walk around, look around, feel it, right? Next step would be into Twinmotion, adding some stuff. The one thing that I will say that, part of the reason why I jump into here for exteriors is that the context. So if I zoom all the way out here, let's zoom. Whoa. Too high. Right? Building all of this stuff and, all of this cool vegetation and organic grass, and you can see all this, and putting all this in, that's where Enscape, in my opinion, is kind of lacking, right? The ability, I mean, literally, like, you can build these scenes using scattered vegetation really quickly. And so I'll talk about that in one quick second. Let me finish the lighting settings, though. So one thing I wanted to point out with the light settings is, which is a huge feature, is local exposure. And so remember what I said before, and I'll turn it off so you guys can see. So before we had local exposure, we didn't have any control over this. And what you'll notice, what I was saying before, is the shadows. I'm going to keep turning it on and off. right? The ambient portions of your project, any of those areas were just too dark. And essentially what I was doing before was I would render it and I'd put in Photoshop, I would turn shadow boost or turn shadows. And so what you'll notice is I actually have both of these cranked up all the way. And I actually think we should probably be given even more flexibility with it, because even this, you can see the highlights are kind of bright. So maybe I bring down the exposure a little bit, maybe because it's the White House or maybe because of the HDRI. But the shadow boost is huge, because without it, you can see the difference between the shadows in the scene. It's crazy. And so you'll see I have that fully up. For depth of field, I don't do that in the live scene. I'll do that in my renderings or my videos. And then bloom and flares, I usually just leave it as is. If you have very specific stuff, you may want to crank up the bloom. That's completely up to you. Then I jump over rendering. So what you'll notice, why does this look so cool? This is a Lumen scene. So we're basically real-time ray tracing this in Lumen. So you do need a computer that can handle it for Lumen. If not, I'll flip it to standard so you can see. Still usable, but you obviously lose a ton of the detail and the ray tracing that happens with Lumen. So again, I'll flip to Lumen here, and then I'll flip to standard, Lumen, standard, right? So big difference. You get real-time reflections. You get much more detail in the shadows. And then this, you can just play with. I don't usually tweak these too much. I'll usually crank the quality up because my computer can handle it. If you want to crank up the scene detail, you can. Not a huge difference in the live scene. You can crank these up for the exteriors. The other thing is the shadows. Anyone who's dealt with real-time rendering programs knows that there's a thing called shadow bias. And so first you want to set your shadow depth to be as low as possible, but to pick up the whole scene. And so if you look at the clovers in front, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but maybe I can zoom down a little bit. So if you pay attention to the clovers up here, as I'm changing the shadow distance, they're getting more and less detail to the shadows, right? So if I go way far, so it is important that you find a happy medium between too far and too close. And so basically what I usually do is I'll either measure in Revit or sometimes even Twinmotion what the deepest shadow I need is, and I'll go with that. So you can see here if I do 200 feet and then I play with the shadow bias a little bit, notice these clovers in front are starting to look really, really, really realistic. And that's how you kind of know that you're getting what you need. Again, if I slide this from 200 to 1,000 feet, notice how different the front shadows look. So I'm going to go back to 200 here, give that. So that's your shadow bias. And then under FX, for my real-time scenes and my non-path trace scenes, I do still use line light. It just gives a little bit of edges on it, in my humble opinion. If I turn it off, maybe you'll see it a little bit. Not really. But what that's doing is it's adding light edges to the lines. And then I usually have a little more contrast and saturation in almost all my scenes. So you can see here I'm 46. Saturation, I'm down at 38. I think that helps. Of course, if you go too far, then you're kind of screwed. But that's it for light settings. So if you copy those light settings using this exact HDRI, you should have a scene that looks generally like this as far as shadows, lights, and so on and so forth. Let me just spin around to here again. All right. And then, so just sort of talking about the rendering there, if I go to export, if I go to media, just to show you what I would do with the ambiance on the actual renderings. And so, for Lumen is fantastic for, and this is where, this is where it may destroy my computer. So let's just wait a second here. I'll read. Would you combine TM with Polycam as point cloud elements? Blah blah. Yeah. So I've combined point clouds from Polycam, point clouds from drone scans, point clouds from laser scans into it. Depending on what you're doing, it's usable. If you're doing imagery, my suggestion would be to not use a point cloud, but use a mesh. And so most programs, including Polycam, can export to meshes, and I would use that if you're doing visualization. If you're doing studies and all of that good stuff, then point clouds are probably okay. And so you guys can't see my screen. Well, there you go. You can see it now. But I hit media and I forgot I had like 6 or 7 path trace view in here. views in here, so we're gonna have to. Okay, here we go. There we go. Okay, so if I go over here, you'll notice I've got some Lumen views. That's what this thing is, and these aren't set to the stuff. But then I also have some path trace views, and so path tracer for real time is a challenge. And actually, I'll just show you real quick what that looks like. So Lumen obviously looks pretty good. If I flip on path tracer, so I'll go to ambiance, I'll go to render, I'll go to path tracer. Hopefully it doesn't blow up on me. So this has a 4090 in it, a laptop 4090 in it, and you can see it does a pretty good job, but it's definitely distracting for users with the fireflies, right? So if I go over here, you know, I do all this good stuff, and so I could turn the details down. I could reduce the fireflies, and that might help a little bit, but not really. So I don't typically use path tracer in the real-time scene, but I will use it for the exterior rendering because I think it looks phenomenal. And so if I go to, let me go to real time again. So if I go to like an actual image here, this is one of the images you might have seen. You can see it's rendering the path tracer. So all the settings are the same. The biggest difference here is I might adjust the exposure and the sun intensity for path tracer. Otherwise, all the ambient settings are the same. All the effect settings are the same. And then the rendering, all I'm doing is flipping it from Lumen to path tracer. And you can see this is essentially what the rendering would look like when it's done. And this is the only area where I'll use depth of field. So notice depth of field. And a trick for depth of field is you can enable it. You can pick a focus point. So I can pick the house as a focus point. And then from there, you can play with the amount of aperture and so on and so forth. And so if you'll notice when this scene is done, and I really shouldn't be doing this live with path tracer. Once this scene is done path tracing, you see it's path tracing here, it's got quite a bit of the grass in the foreground is blurred out. So if you're producing renderings, you know, I definitely highly suggest you use path tracer. But what's really neat now is that if I flip to my real-time view, it's got a pretty good quality for a real-time scene compared to what it was pre-Lumen for the real-time scene. So those are kind of the light settings, applying the materials. As far as some of the tips and tricks in Revit coming into it, one thing you'll notice is if I go to my site plan, I've got a bunch of subdivides here. I was going to say subregions, subdivides here because that was topo solids. And if I click this, you'll notice this is called forest ground, right? This is called forest ground. This one is called grass. This one here is called grass 3D. So this is asphalt. This is stone. This is planting bed. This is, let's see here. This is planting bed as well. So I've got a whole bunch of different materials on my site. And so the reason for that is being able to build the context super fast. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another new file. So let's do a new scene here. I won't save that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to start from scratch right now. Okay, so you guys are looking straight at this. Before I bring in anything else, I'll turn on HDRI. I'll do, let's see, not morning and afternoon. Let's do noon. What did I do? It was noon 20, I think. Noon cloudy 20. There we go. Let's sign into this crap. Okay. Download it. Okay, like I said, you have to set your settings if you want to see anything cool, even if I'm just showing you guys something good here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to load in the raw model. I'm just going to show you how those topography tweaks or topo solid tweaks make it so that you can build. This is where Twinmotion, in my opinion, excels above Enscape, is in this ability to build non-Revit context and geometries and objects quickly. Okay, so I'm going to throw noon cloudy on there. I think I'm using Twinmotion with Datasmith early for white box rendering. Yeah, you can do that too. You might want to use different settings for it, but all right, I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. All right, so let's import my scene here. So we're gonna start fresh. Again, what I would do in most projects is I would have just a topography piece that I'm exporting and not the building with it. But again, for the sake of today, it's everything. So if I zoom out, you'll see I've got my topography, and in theory, these are all pieces. I probably should have put textures on them so I could see the different colors, but you get the idea. Okay, so first let's finish adding the settings to this here. We'll change that. Send intensity to 50. What did I have here? Exposure was 0.5. I'm just going to redo those exact settings that we were using before. Local exposure up, shadow boost up, lumen, quality up, shadow, I think it was 200, shadow bias down. Oh, we got to rotate this a little bit. So you can see just with those sun settings, even when I don't have materials, you'll notice how the scene is starting to look way less gamey and way more realistic, right? Obviously materials would help, but and then of course go to effects, crank up the contrast, lower the saturation, and then turn on line light. Those are kind of the general things that I'll apply to it. Okay, and you can see already the settings are looking so much better. Okay, so what do we do with this site? Okay, so I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna apply materials just so that you can see exactly how this converts. I'm gonna go to nature and I'm gonna set this to cubic UVs. I'm gonna throw forest ground over here. That one looks really bad from far away, but that's okay. That's a really, really ugly one from far away, huh? Let's turn up the grunge a little bit. Yeah. And then, yeah, maybe scale it. Scale it down. All right. Grunge is super helpful in Twinmotion as well, by the way, if you want to break up huge fields of nastiness like that. Okay, so we'll just do that one for this. I'll do grass 5 for my 3D grass. And then I have a grass, I'll do grassy ground for the rest of it. That's still kind of, no, let's do grass 2 for the rest of it. Sure. Okay. Yeah, so especially for these big things, grunge is super helpful to just kind of break it up. But again, you're never going to see it from here. I'm just showing you guys. So you'll notice I actually have, all these different pieces in my landscape, okay? Just because we're on it, I might as well finish with the asphalt here. There's a nice asphalt, by the way, if you guys are looking for a good asphalt material. If I go to my Mega Scans, 3D surfaces, and then, now I gotta find it. Asphalt, rough. Somewhere in here there's a really nice damaged, like one that looks really cool, like a nice old asphalt. But I would suggest checking those out if you haven't before. They're super neat. Yes, that one's kind of cool. Helps break it up. Scale might be off a little bit on that one, but you get the idea. I'll scale that down a little bit and maybe rotate it a little bit. Sure. And then I'll make it darker. So you can start to see what I'm trying to do there. Anyways, so I've got all these materials, okay? So not only do they look okay to break it down, but the key here is being able to populate via those surfaces, right? So if I go to populate down on the bottom here, and then I go to place, and now we have a bunch of options here, but I'm gonna go old school, I'm gonna go scatter. And now what I can do is I can basically build my forest in a couple clicks. So I'm gonna go to trees. I'm gonna use some trees that I love. So I'm gonna use laurel. I'm gonna put a couple laurels in here. Okay, I'm gonna put a turkey oak, I believe. This is one of my other ones that I like. So a couple turkey oaks. Okay, another tip when you're using scatter is you can add multiple objects in there. And then we'll put some kind of coniferous tree here. So maybe we'll do Austrian pine. So we'll do a couple of those. Okay. I'm gonna select all these. And then there's a little button here for plus. It says scatter tool. Okay, so by clicking this, what can I do? I can quickly do that, right? And because I have these different surfaces, see how it's able to quickly build that scene around it. And then from there, I can take these things, if I zoom in here, I can modify them a little bit. I'll grab this one, and I'll maybe change the age of all these things. I can change the amount, the density, the tint of the colors, etc., etc. I can also go back and I can erase some, right? So I can take an eraser and I can say, What's the diameter of this eraser? There it is. That's pretty big. And I can just erase pieces of it if I want, you name it. But by doing this, I probably went a little too crazy here. By doing this, you could see how quickly you could build that context, right? And then you can do the same with like ground coverage if you want, right? So if I go in here, I do populate, scatter, and then I'll do maybe some bushes, or let's do vegetation. I'll do a couple, I don't know, some common ferns. So I'll do some ferns at the lower level. Not a tropical plant. This is New England here. A couple more common ferns, and then maybe you throw in a bush or two or something like that. Whatever. You get the idea. And so by selecting this, okay, come on. Shift doesn't want to work. Okay. Now I can actually do the same thing. Look at, I can lay down the base of this forest, right? And so by doing this, now you can see I didn't do it over here. So let me grab the same scatter here, add it to this, right? I mean, this is obviously overkill, but you get the idea. So now I'm actually blocking the horizon, which is super helpful, right? I'm able to build this scene. If I want some variety in these, I might make a different scatter for each of these. You could also grab just one of each tree. So notice I can grab like one of the turkey oaks, one of the laurels, another one of the turkey oak. I can shrink it a little bit, right? You can kind of play with each one within the scatter, which is kind of cool. But you notice how fast I can actually build this thing, right? Super fast. And then you'll notice I also had 3D grass. And so if I click this is 3D grass. So this isn't a great object or process for, or this isn't a good project where you necessarily need to do this. But if you have a gigantic project, then you don't want your whole site to be grass and then to do 3D grass on it. By doing this smaller subdivide, now I can do 3D grass and it doesn't apply it to all the areas that I don't need. Grass is the exact same way. So I go to populate, I go to scatter, let me go to grass and flowers, and I'm just going to use lawn 1, lawn 1, lawn 1, lawn 1. I'll do 4 or 5 of them. It's probably fine. I'll go in here. I'll say plus. Okay, now I'll zoom in a little closer. Plus, plus. Click it a couple times if I need to. And then from here, I can also just take a few of these. All right, I don't have to do them all. And I can change the size of a couple of these. Okay. And then I'll show you my trick for the clovers as well. You can either paint them on, but you can actually use scattered vegetation for even the clovers. So if I do clovers 3 and clovers 2, right, I can scatter them on this, which is going to be crazy. Notice how crazy they are right there. But I can take the, oh boy, try the clovers. I can take the clovers, take an eraser, right? Now that's scattered on there, and just sort of do stuff like this, right? Only show little areas of clovers here and there, whatever it is. And it looks kind of silly when you're looking at it now, but if you do different diameters, if you do different patches of it like this, when I get out of this and I zoom in, you get something like that, right? So now you can see already, the only thing we're missing right now is a nice tree right here and maybe one right here. That will, and let's change the age of this guy, make him pretty tall. There we go. Give that a little bit of shadow in the foreground. And now you can see just like that, add some materials and you basically have the scene, right? So, that right there to me is where this thing excels, right? And that took all of 10 minutes to do the entire context of forest within this thing. So, and the key with it, of course, was setting up simple subdivides in Revit with different materials. So now if I jump back into here, this scene is basically all I got to do is add materials to it. Throw in maybe a couple of people in the front playing, and then it might have been a Bob Ross reference. Yes, Pete. I am a big Bob Ross fan. Always have been. And so, then you can go around and you can add in, smaller bushes and vegetation, around the planting here, change the size of them, throw a fern in there, whatever you want to do. You get the idea. Throw a couple people in there, add some materials, and then you're basically ready to go. And so those renderings, what they look like at the end of the day, if I open this up here, is Oh, sorry, on the other screen. They're looking a little cool for some reason. Oh, those are the. So here's some examples of what those renderings could look like, right? And so as I mentioned before, oh, OneDrive isn't syncing. Sorry. As I mentioned before, the presentation of it all, I actually prefer these days just doing live presentations. And so you can see if I'm doing this here. There's my nice white building here, going through it. And then, you know, to talk about sort of going on the interior and whatnot, I think that's going to be next. And so, you know, I've got some feedback from my wife and client about the exterior that I'm going to play around with, right? And so the next thing is going to be probably building out the interior of the current scheme, so that she can visualize what it is that I'm thinking and what it is that I'm planning for this. And so I think that may be the next video. Maybe is to talk about now. Okay, what are we doing with the Twinmotion interior scene? Because I will do it all in Twinmotion, and some of the tips and tricks there, because there are some things that you might want to know there. Okay, cool. Well, awesome, guys. Thank you for joining. I hope this was helpful. I know it was a little all over the place, but I wanted to just sort of run through some of the tips and tricks that you guys hopefully will help you with your Twinmotion scenes. The Ambience is probably your first start there, and you'll automatically start noticing a major difference. Ambience, start using Quixel Megascan materials, and then building your scene, you know, the context around it as well. So, and of course, do not use direct link, use Datasmith exporter. And yeah, thanks for joining tonight, everyone. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the content. This is part 2 of this series, episode 116 of BIM After Dark Live. And please, if you're interested in joining our conference in September, head on over to nichebim.com. Again, that's NICHEBIM.com, and register to come hang out with me, some of your other favorite YouTubers, and other folks doing exactly what you're doing in Revit or in BIM as architects. So please subscribe to the channel. Have an awesome weekend, everyone, and I'll talk to you guys later. Cheers.